Hey listeners, Adam O'Donnell here. Today you hear from Jeremy Almond. He talks about how they hit product market fit by meeting the customer where they are.
We had to learn how to sell the value in a way they understood and meet them where they were at, which was the investments that they had already done.
He shares how he waited for nearly 2 hours before a prospect meeting, and he could see in the other room the people that he was about to meet with.
What was going on in that other room? I think there was an interview and they're like, oh yeah, we're growing so fast. We need to hire like 5 finance people right now because we got to chase the money down. We got to be able to run the operations smoother. Like our business is going like.
So instead of leading with a demo, he started with the problem that they already had.
Can we just pause for a minute? Like our whole vision is to make your finance stack more efficient for you. Like if we can help you automate it, we can help you get your money fast. Those hires you make, maybe you made 2 of those hires. Boy, if I could supercharge those two people, wouldn't that be like super valuable? And they were like, look, sign on the dotted line. Let's do that.
By the time he got to the demo, it was just a confirmation of the concept that they had already been sold.
The demo then basically validated the problem they were trying to solve with humans. And so it made it much easier versus start there.
Hey, welcome to Sit Down Startup Founder Podcast. I'm your host, Adam O'Donnell, former founder and VC. I now work at Zendesk for Startups, where we offer 6 months free use of Zendesk for qualified high growth companies. Jeremy, welcome to the show. Really excited to hear your story about Paystand. If you could first tell us when you founded the company and was it doing the same thing that it is now?
Yeah. So Adam is just stoked to be here, man. Like, it's cool to be able to share founder stories with other founders because it's not an easy ride, So, if you're going to build anything great, it's going to take time, right? And so, like, how do you build these sort of enduring companies? So for me, Paystand is still hitting the same mission we started out with. So just for context for folks, Paystand is the business-to-business payment network that creates radically better economics for customers. You can think of a really, really simple way where like what Venmo does for consumers, making money movement digital and magic in the 21st century, we do for complicated transactions in the heartblood of our economy. So how did I get in the space? What's the origin story? So the first few decades, 2 decades of my career were mostly in the enterprise side. So who we service today. So on one hand, it's important to know what the customer problem is, which I experienced day in and day out, in an earlier life. But in reality, if you're going to build a company that you think has create a dent in the world, I think it's really important to have a personal reason for it too, because building companies is hard. And so for me, the origin story actually started a little over 10 years ago. So my family was one of the many millions of Americans that were just absolutely wrecked during the financial crisis. The short version of their story was one of them, my mother was an immigrant who came to the US. She married, a blue collar white guy construction worker. None of them went to college. They had 2 American dreams. One was to, see their kids go off to college and have a better life, like all great parents do. And then 2 was to buy their own home, right? And so they worked super hard, in construction and in the fields for like 20 years to buy a house. And from kind of no fault of their own with people who don't have social safety nets, they were just one of the many millions of Americans who were affected by the banks basically falling apart. And so they lost that home. And it's a much, much longer story, but the short version was, I was just super pissed off about that. I think a bunch of us at that period felt like something as important to the economy as the financial system could do better. And so that's what makes technology, I think, so great. And what we get to do is we get to imagine the world not as it is, but as it could be. And so I went back to grad school at that time, right after 2008, 2009. I studied why were banks too big to fail? What were the systematic problems in financial services? I got really, really early, this is like 12 years ago, involved in the crypto world and sort of what's the promise of the future. And so we started this company with this just view, if we could democratize and decentralize commercial payments, boy, that would be a big, big dent in making, banking system and financial system more fair. And so we've been at it kind of ever since. So.
That is cool, man. I love how the mission does not change and the mission that you've built on is unbelievable. I think at the end of the day, because whatever you're doing it for at least 10 years, or if you're building a lasting company. So to have a mission that you connect with so closely and I appreciate you sharing that. The first thing I was going to say is, so how big are you now? How many employees do you have now?
Yeah, so we kind of from if I fast forward a little bit in the story, so finished grad school, started the business like kind of idea in a napkin 2013. 2014, we basically raised capital on the idea in a napkin. We've been selling in market since basically 2016. So I don't know, whatever that is, 7 years now. And so now, the business is at some fun level of scale. So we are the largest, fastest growing sort of next gen business to business payment network on the planet. We do over $4 billion in volume on the blockchain, which I think is probably the largest commercial blockchain on the planet. We have 400,000 businesses that pay into our network. We've raised, $85 million to capital to date. We're super efficient with it. So, not a high burn rate business. Instead, we're just like, let's go build an amazing, company that actually change how business is done. So we're excited. We've got some scale. But if you think about the level of, transformation in financial services, we're just super scratching the surface. So on one hand, the business has now got some velocity to it. That's really fun. On the other hand, I look and there's some amazing consumer payment companies, amazing companies, but commercial payments is like 5 or 10 times larger, depending on what analyst you look at. Business to business is the heartblood of our economy. And there is no company right now that is basically, fully transforming that space. And so we think, there's a Thunder Lizard independent public company to be built. So we're excited about that.
I can't wait to see it. So the first thing is go back to a time with your team before you've hit that hockey stick moment. Maybe you were even a little frustrated that growth wasn't what you had hoped it would be, but it was right before that real moment of like, okay, we got something here, and we've, as seen by this huge test that we just did that worked, or something like that.
Yeah, what's interesting now, looking back a few years, is the product and the value props are the same. Kind of how do we use that has, you learn more around it, but so today our network is used by all these companies. It's effectively gets their money faster, cheaper, and more effectively. Meaning, money we believe is software. It should be instant, automatic, and without fees. And payments don't work that way today. And so, if I look back at the very early version of the product, it was a very early version of that same value prop. So our very first product effectively did two things. You could basically get paid in Bitcoin and crypto, which was way too early. But if you did, you'd get your money super fast. We could automate the process with the invoice, and then you'd ultimately, you'd have no fees because, that's the way digital assets work. But this is like in 2015, right? And then we said you could get paid in credit cards as a way to kind of get people bootstrapped into the network. If I look at the product today, it's a more mature version of that. You run into our network, you don't have to worry about kind of anything. It all gets paid in dollars and cents, but it ultimately moves that money in that same way. So value props are the same, but how we get there, how we position is really different. And so I think in the early days, let's say 2016, 2017, what we had to learn was how did we speak in those value props in a language that our customer understood. So we couldn't talk about crypto, we couldn't talk about these things. So we just had to talk about what did it mean for their business. And so we started working with companies that basically had already put most of their finances in the cloud. So they had like an Oracle NetSuite, they had a Sage Intacct, maybe they had a Salesforce on the CRM side. So their business was digitally native already. And they'd already invested in making their business like quite competitive by putting technology in it. And what we had to say to them is, hey, Mrs. CFO and Mr. CFO, you did all that work, but if the revenue is the lifeblood of your business and you still have to chase down paper checks, like that's crazy. You just spent millions and millions of dollars, and then the part that's the most important doesn't work. So we had to learn how to sell the value in a way they understood and meet them where they were at, which was the investments that they had already done. And when we started doing that, that's really when it started taking off. And then that became repeatable because you can start going, okay, we know exactly who that customer is. We know where they live. We know how they operate. And we know the language we can use. So it's the tech is the innovation, but the language and the positioning is really what like you have to figure out right in that product market fit zone.
Oh man, that is a painful lesson that I spent years trying to figure out. And the concept of jobs to be done if you're familiar with that, which is, it's just like simply like no one cares about a drill bit if you're ultimately trying to build a building or a hammer. They just care about the outcome. They're trying to build a house, they're trying to build a whatever, a shed, but these are just tools to help you get there. So you're saying, hey, speak the language in a way that they understand, meet them where they are. Is there like a specific customer where you really had that switch of mind?
Yeah, you have these moments as a founder, especially when you're doing product market fit. You should have a view that you can kind of see around the corner where you're like, there are signals of pre-product market fit. The customer is not necessarily fully buying yet. It's not the full price, but you're starting to see some heads nod, right? Or you're starting to see the problem. So our very first, what I'd call long-term customer that not only mapped our product market fit, but mapped to the market we were selling into, with the customer profile we were selling into. I flew out, I'm in California most of the time. I flew out to New York, and this customer had just implemented like a big ERP installation. They had NetSuite in their system. And I was supposed to go meet them to talk about, hey, let's change your payment infrastructure. And I get there, and this is like a distribution company. It's super cool. They like had all of the like alcohol distribution in New York and the Northeast for like the coolest wine, the coolest like beverages from Europe and all these other places. Anyway, so I get into the office. I'm supposed to meet the CFO, okay? And I go into the office and I wait in the lobby, and they put me in a conference room. They put me in a conference room for 2 hours, okay? Now I'm a little annoyed, but like, you got it. Those early customers matter, right? And I'm like, okay, So anyway, so I watch like people scrambling around. It's one of those glass conference rooms. And I see the conference room next to me, the people I'm pretty sure report up to my buyer, the finance person, the controller, and some AR people. I see them going in and out of this conference room. And I'm pretty sure they're interviewing people. And so anyway, so 2 hours later, the CFO comes in and the CEO comes in, and they're like, hey, I'm super sorry, blah, 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 blah. Things are crazy. And I go, hey, can I just ask you, like, while you were putting me up and I was sitting here drinking like 30 cups of coffee, what was going on in that other room? Like, I think there was an interview, and they're like, oh yeah, we're growing so fast. We need to hire like 5 finance people right now. Because we got to chase the money down. We got to be able to run the operation smoother. Like, our business is going like this. And I said, hey, like, can we just pause for a minute? Like our whole vision is to make your finance stack like more efficient for you. Like, if we can help you automate it, we can help you get your money fast, and we can help you like get your money like at a lower cost. Boy, wouldn't that be cool? So those hires you make, maybe you make 2 of those hires, because it's hard to hire people. Maybe you're not going to get 4 people, but boy, if I could supercharge those two people, wouldn't that be like super valuable for you? And they were like, look, sign on the dotted line. Let's do that, because I don't think we're going to get those 5 people tomorrow, but if I can get 2 of them in Paystand, like we're off to the races. So I think that's an example of like, we met where the need was at with the customer that was trying to solve the problem with a human case. And we said, hey, let's come alongside that and let's just supercharge it so you can be super competitive. So
I love this, because I think people get so excited about the hype, the lingo of their own business, crypto and all the other things. And you're saying, wait, like there's no, you weren't even talking about doing a demo. It was like, hey, this problem that you have right now that caused you to make me wait for 2 hours, I got you right now. And they had to have conceptually understood how you were going to do it. How did you phrase that?
Yeah, I think once they said, okay, here's the problem to solve, then the product can come in, right? Then the product's like, cool. In our case, it turned out that those 4 people were literally reconciling payments. So they'd get a paper check in, they'd have to spend all this time tracking down who paid what, because it's logistics, so it's super complicated. Oh, I now need to call people. Like, if you broke down what they were actually having that hiring and saying, well, if we could just automate that process. So let me show you how the invoice goes out, the payment goes out in a single click, everything's automated. It's like self-driving money. And your people, like, all they need to do now is finalize that past statement, and everything else in that cash cycle is done. The demo then basically validated the problem they were trying to solve with humans. And so it made it much easier versus start there. Yeah.
That's good. How did you take these learnings from this meeting and apply it to hit that hockey stick growth?
Well, the cool thing is if you're in a sufficiently big enough market, but you want to be in a sufficiently big enough market where you can target, at least in B2B, like who those people are. Because sometimes like I'll look at like other founders. My first startup was a problem like this that didn't get as far as I wanted it to. And it's like, you can talk about a big market, but like, how do you target those people in a really, really specific way? So what we knew from that role was there were 10,000 other people that was just like that CFO I was talking to. So cool, you know, if that's one of 10,000, boy, we got a business to build, right? You know, so
that's amazing. What was your best channel to reach them?
Yeah, I mean, so those channels will evolve like over time. That's actually one of the things that changes from like the early days, like post product market fit to the days where you're like scaling, is those channels like evolve and get more mature. So in the early days, again, like with our business, who we sell into, which is principally mid-market enterprise, once we knew who they were and we knew what their like buying behavior was and what their customer profile looked like, we just, you know, we went, I don't know, like hand-to-hand combat, right? So we were pretty sales led. We're like, okay, if we can get to those 10,000, like great, whether it's, you know, directed smile and dial, whether it's LinkedIn, like we know who they are, we know where they live, you know, and those are the early days. You start growing over time and you'll start layering things in. Like now, almost 50% of our business is driven by channel partners because those people interact with other folks in the ecosystem. You know, and marketing plays a role and all these other things that you kind of layer in. But I'm a big fan in the early days, like you got to just, you know, get in front of that customer and you got to just go spear, you know, so.
Absolutely. How are you spending your time then versus now?
I mean, you know, in those days, I spent like, basically to me in those days, like if you weren't talking to a customer or you weren't building product, like nothing else mattered. You know, at a different stage of the company, you know, we're a couple hundred people now, you know, it's a different stage of the company. To me, like a big thing is how do I scale within the team? Because that same is true, but the organization has way more surface area. So now like, you know, who do I hire is probably the big thing I think about because that person's going to create massive leverage. And so, you know, how do they steward well? Stewardship is so important. And so you just, you know, it's important to hire people better, smarter, faster than you know, at this stage. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you're a founder and you're that meeting you had with that customer in New York, like maybe it's a month before that, what is the best advice that you're giving someone who's like in that phase?
Yeah. So I think it's really easy to focus on what doesn't work. What I would say is if you distill your value prop down to like some very, very basic things, and go, what is the smallest sign of smoke before there's fire, right? And then what you're doing is you're iterating on that, right? So even before that meeting with that customer, we had customers that were using us that were like, hey, cool, I don't know, like this crypto stuff is a little hard for my business to uptake, but boy, if I got my money without fees and didn't have to pay 3% to Visa, like if you could do that in a way that 100% of my payments like did that, I'd be stoked, right? Like the product didn't fully do it in a way that worked for their business in those early days, but they were validating this thing that said, hey, there's a version of your value prop that if you actually get this promise to be true, you know, like that we will buy, right? And so I think you got to look at that and then you just got to iterate on that a billion times, right? So
just keep that cycle because the more you got to keep the cycle up. There's no way around it.
Yeah, blow on the smoke, right? It's like a little piece of kindling. You're like, okay, I can see it. The twigs are running, just like now we got to blow on it, make it work. So,
man, I love it. Last question: what's your superpower, just you personally, and maybe as it changed a bit as the company's grown?
Yeah, you know, I think they say in general, like a CEO's job is to ensure the company's growing, like ideally at a world-class rate. You know. B, like hire the best people that you can, and C, ultimately don't run out of money, right? Like those are kind of the three North Stars you should be working on when the company's at the stage. You know, and so I think for me, what do I enjoy? I enjoy two things. Looking at where can we build the vision and set the vision, right? To make sure the company's growing in the right place, right? And then I actually really love going down into the operation level. And so I can go really really wide and really deep, kind of like a T, right? So I tend to look for people who are like that, where they're wide in surface area, but then they're deep in one area. And why I think that's important is, a company without vision is ultimately rudderless and doesn't achieve kind of world-class greatness. They're just okay. And in the Valley, like, we should be spending our time on the biggest, best things that move the needle forward. So you have to have a North Star, but then if you can't execute, it does not matter. Like, it does not matter. And so a high degree of discipline matters a ton. And so, I run hard and go do those things, and I think the business will be okay. So,
Jeremy, thank you so much.
Adam, always good, bro. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
That's a wrap. Thanks for listening. Make sure to subscribe on Apple, Spotify, and Google. If you want to learn more about Zendesk for Startups and our free offer, please check out our website at zendesk.com/startups.